Welcome to A Fresh Face in Hell. I'm your host, Jonathan Evison. Every week we talk to somebody new and interesting, somebody intellectually curious, somebody who will hopefully renew our faith in this cold, cruel world we live in. A Fresh Face in Hell. So, I love baseball. I've always loved baseball since I was a little kid. Baseball and books were my first loves. I love that baseball is, and I quote, slow. I love that baseball is understated. I love the choreography of the game. I love the sort of ever-mounting tension and drama of the game that we don't get in football or basketball quite in the same way. And I love statistics. As a kid, I read the almanac. I was a statistic head. I was a total stat head. I remembered all the, heights of the tallest buildings and the mountains and every baseball statistic known to man. Like I can still, in my day, the leading all-time home run hitters were Hank Aaron at 755, Willie Mays at 660, Babe Ruth at 714, Frank Robinson at 586, Harmon Killebrew at 573, et cetera, et cetera. There's some new names in there now, but just to illustrate the point, the stats are in there forever. And one of the beautiful things about baseball and statistics is that for 140 years, baseball is maintained a sort of delicate statistical equilibrium by which you could measure players across eras, with a few exceptions, like the first being the live ball era of the 1920s, where they started to use a tighter wound baseball that was brighter because after Carl Mays got beamed in the head, I believe. They did that for safety reasons, but the ball flew further. So that's when we saw Babe Ruth suddenly just up the game on the number of home runs hit. Then there was 1968, which was the year of the pitcher, Bob Gibson with his 1.12 ERA, and Denny McLain, last man to win 30 games. So they lowered the mound the next year to even it out for the hitters. They lowered it from 12 inches to 10 inches. So we saw a little bit of a statistical downtick in hitting. I believe Carl Yastrzemski won the batting title with a 301 the next year, which is the lowest batting average anyone's ever won the batting title with. But overall, the statistical measures hold pretty true. And you can't say this for basketball. Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in a game. Wilt Chamberlain averaged over 30 rebounds a game. They didn't even keep track of blocks then, but people that say him said he blocked 20 points a game. The modern player can't help to keep up with that. Johnny Unitas back in the 60s was not going to throw for 400 yards every week like Patrick Mahomes. So there's always this, you can't play that what-if game, like you can't compare statistics. And this was always true. And then Bill James comes along, who's, I guess, I don't know if Bill James is a mathematician first and a baseball fan second, but Bill James sort of invented Sabermetrics, which was a new way of objectively measuring players by statistical measures that were supposedly more objective. Now, we'll get into how those work later with today's guest, who's the legendary sports writer, Joe Posnanski. We're going to ask Joe to help us explain that. But what happened is, statistics used to measure the culture, and now I feel like, and we see this everywhere in globalism and just, late capitalism, and now analytics sort of drive the culture. And I don't know, is there an inherent danger with that? Descartes taught us that, we should never conform the conformity of the future with the past, but that's exactly what modern analytics seek to do. I know that me personally, when Billy Beane in 2002, who was the general manager of the Oakland A's, was the first, he was the first general manager to sort of institute sabermetrics and use them in his game plan. So all of a sudden, it didn't come about players with big salaries and home runs and runs batted in. These were no longer, and batting average, these were no longer the main measures of a player. Now there were things like WAR, which is wins over replacement, or OPS. These became the more the statistical measure of a player, and it didn't measure up with all the past eras where we were talking about home runs and RBIs. And so Billy Beane was able to find value in players who drew a lot of walks, which isn't a sexy statistic, or players that scored a lot of runs and things like that. So it worked almost for the Oakland A's. They went all the way to the World Series and they lost, or the championship series. I don't remember. I'm senile. But something happened to me. Something about Sabermetrics has sort of killed the game for me. And I was curious to talk to Joe Posnanski about this today too, because he's a friend of Bill James. He's somebody who knows Sabermetrics in and out, but he's also somebody who's written about the magic of baseball and the soul of the game. So today, I want to have a conversation about baseball, and hopefully in a way that some of you that aren't baseball fans can kind of latch on and be interested in. Today's guest is a legendary sports writer. He's a #1 New York Times bestseller. Unlike me, he's just a regular New York Times bestseller. His book, The Soul of Baseball, A Road Trip Through Buck Neal's America, won the Casey Award, and it was also listed as, Major League Baseball listed as one of the best baseball books of all time. So that's basically like the Hall of Fame of sports writing right there. I could go on, but I don't want to embarrass the guy. Please welcome to the show, Joe Posnanski.
Hi. Good to see you.
Posnanski, sorry about that.
No, you did great. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. Now, Joe, Fresh Face in Hell is not a sports podcast per se, but, we talk about everything from, philosophy to theology to grudges to whatever, but just stuff that I'm intellectually curious about. And I thought I love baseball. I wanted to use Sabermetrics as kind of our entree into this because I think it speaks to the larger culture and late capitalism and globalism and just metrics in general. But I was wondering if you could maybe help us out and just kind of give us a little education on Sabermetrics for the lay people out there.
Yeah, I mean, Sabermetrics have been around. Bill James, the writer and a very good friend of mine, actually invented the term. It's built around the sort of the acronym SABR, which stands for Society of American Baseball Researchers. And what the way that Bill has always described Sabermetrics is it's sort of a search for the objective truth in baseball. Baseball, like pretty much all sports, but I imagine like pretty much every field in any form, used to, there a lot of mythology that kind of was pushed in the game that was just meant to be accepted because the experts told us so, right? So there used to be a very famous saying in baseball that pitching is 90% of baseball. That used to be a very famous saying to sort of talk about how important pitching is. So that people always say pitching is 90% of baseball. And Bill wrote a very famous takedown of how do you determine this? Where is this number coming from? How do you come up with 90% of baseball? Like, does that mean that 90% of the money should go to pitchers? I mean, like he just went through a whole bunch of different things. And that was sort of one of the key early sort of takedowns to sort of explain what Sabermetrics is. And of course, as the years have gone on, Sabermetrics have come to represent statistical advances, these advanced statistics. Now there are a million different ways to do that, both with, numbers and spreadsheets and so on, with using big data, but also now at every ballpark, they've got various cameras throughout the ballpark that measure
exit velocity and launch angle,
exit velocity, how the distance that the fielder ran to make a play, the sprint speed of every player on the field at every different moment in the game. So there's all of this data, and now it's being used in various ways, and of course there's Sabermetrics for the teams themselves, where they use the sort of the proprietary data to kind of get an edge if they can. But there's in a much larger sense Sabermetrics for the rest of us as fans that sort of hopefully give us some sort of insight into the game.
So like it used to be all about home runs, RBIs, batting average, runs, and now sort of the holy grail would be like OPS, which is What does OPS stand for?
OPS is on base percentage plus slugging percentage is the way that is. And of course, even that is sort of a real numerical mystery because you're not really supposed to add. Those two numbers work from a different denominator, so you're not even supposed to add those together. But they, that is something people see, OPS, a lot of talk about on base percentage. And then obviously, I think the big one now is WAR, which is wins above replacement, which is a whole mess of a.
You get on the baseball groups and guys will they will die on that hill, and I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I can see some value in it, but and WAR itself has two different measures, right? So that's not even there's like F-WAR and P-WAR.
Right. There are two different big baseball. There's Fangraphs and there's Baseball Reference. They each use a completely different formula for WAR, particularly for pitchers. So it is. There's a lot out there, and it used to be, you're right. I mean, when we were growing up, I mean, you would watch a baseball game or listen to it on the radio, and that was it. Batting average, home runs, RBI. That's all they ever told you. The entire statistical package for us was Reggie Jackson is hitting 267 with 34 home runs and 109 RBI. Like that was everything. And of course now,
even runs only mattered for a leadoff hitter, kind of. It seemed like,
and they wouldn't even talk about stolen bases or doubles. I mean, stolen bases later when Ricky Henderson came along and so on, put up these huge numbers. But I mean, it was just very, very simple back then.
So now let's just call the statistics people what they are, nerds. I was one of them. I read the almanac when I was a kid. But for them, this was like as I understand it, Bill James wasn't necessarily trying to sell his wares. He was just pointing out to these things. And then Billy Beane of the Athletics kind of piqued his interest because here's a small market team with a low valuation that's trying to compete, and he can't afford the salaries that the Yankees can, and the Dodgers and the big markets. So he institutes this idea that the sort of James school is like, you're looking for the wrong qualities in players. The conventional logic is pay these big salaries for guys to hit lots of home runs, and that's still part of the equation. But you need to look at the runs and how often they score. Like it doesn't matter how they get on base. We all can agree that the walk is one of the least sexy plays in baseball.
Right.
But the value of the walk suddenly went through the roof. And so what began to happen is these small and medium market teams were able to sort of be competitive with the large market teams. However, walk me through this now. In 20 years, this has all changed because now we see everybody's playing Moneyball.
Right.
And who's in the playoffs? The teams with the biggest valuations. It's not the Brewers, it's the Dodgers and the Mets and the Yankees. So how did that transpire?
I think a lot of it is exactly, transpired the way you said. I mean, really, there were a few teams, very, very few teams. The A's were very early on. Obviously, the great Michael Lewis book, Moneyball, is all about the A's being one of the first to fully embrace statistical analysis and fully embrace that a lot of the truths that everybody had believed forever were not necessarily truths at all. The Tampa Bay Rays came along and took it to a whole other level. Just a complete. They started doing all sorts of things that now the game is even moved away from. They brought in all kinds of shifting, defensive shifting, where they would, there were essentially no positions anymore. Shortstop could play anywhere in the infield, and it had like a total football vibe where you move people around, and they did all kinds of things and had success with it. But as is not surprising, the teams with the most money, they can also afford to get statistical gurus, right? I mean, that they can build up bigger analytics departments than anybody because they've got the money to do it. And the Red Sox certainly were one of those teams that did. They hired Bill James himself and won a bunch of World Series doing that for the first time in 80 years or whatever. So that's what's happened. And yes,
so Moneyball has earned its keep. It's predictive. It's shown that it has a predictive value, which, people in economics have known for a long time. People who play in the stock market and hedge funds and so forth.
Sure.
What's we're looking for parity in sports. The NFL has done it somewhat effectively, but we can still see that really it's about, in football, it becomes about who has the best system in place, who is the most well-managed, because you can bring a rookie quarterback and you bring him into a stable situation. Maybe he can sit for a year.
Right.
He's got some weapons around him. He's got an offensive line. He can thrive. But you can take the most talented, the guy with the most arm talent, the greatest measurables, and bring him into a lousy situation, and he will fail, no matter how good he is.
Yes.
But football still has managed to, they've found some sort of equilibrium with the parity. So, I mean, to me, the answer in baseball's got to be what? The salary cap? Or
Well, I mean, that is certainly something that baseball's wanted forever, and the players have very successfully fought against that. But there is already a financial system in place with this luxury tax, that it's not a salary cap, but it's essentially saying if you go over this limit, you have to put a huge amount of money into a luxury tax into the game, and
that money is distributed evenly.
It is distributed
between the rich
evenly
owners
among the teams that have the least money. So
it's socialism. I like it.
It is socialism, but it's not full-blooded socialism like in the NFL. But here's the problem with that, and this is, I guess, what some would argue is a problem with socialism. A lot of teams are not spending that money that they're getting from this. They're just pocketing the money, and so you look at teams like the Pirates, for example, where they have not been any good for quite a long time, and there doesn't seem like there is a huge reason for them to get good, because they're cashing these checks and doing fine for themselves, for the owner financially. And of course, that's a huge complaint, and people argue about it. Cincinnati, similar situation.
Minnesota, right? Until Tom Kelly came along and won some, they were just purposely operating as a middle market team, because it was profitable.
And there's an argument to be made that there's no value in overspending when you can only be so good, right? Like that's the whole idea. I mean, the Houston Astros pretty famously completely tanked and became the worst team in baseball for 4 years, while they saved the money, while they got their draft picks, while they built the team up, and then they built themselves a little mini dynasty doing it that way. Other teams have tried to follow that without as much success, but it's a real problem in baseball.
That's such a big ask of a fan base, to tank. And so for 162 games to just know I hate to say it, I'm kind of a fair weather fan. I had big hopes for the Seahawks this year, and I'm already like, I don't know if I got 3.5 hours this Sunday. It's shambolic. I got 3 kids to chase around. I got a career. I could be writing for 3.5 hours, but I'm going to stick it out. What do you think that the widespread acceptance of metrics in general say about our culture? Aren't we kind of squeezing all these intangibles out, grit and determination and chemistry? We see it everywhere in our culture with the algorithms online, and what does this say about us as a culture?
I think it's hard. I think there are a lot of baseball fans who feel pushed out by this, honestly. They're not Bill James always says, and I think he's right. He's like, baseball is there to be enjoyed. That's its only purpose, is for it to be enjoyed. For us as fans, it's for us to enjoy it. And for some people, if we are nerds, the enjoyment does come in part by, looking at these numbers and breaking down the game and analyzing and seeing how teams are building and how smart they are and whatever. Some just want to go to the ballpark, and they just want to go, and they want the mythology. I've spent a lot of my career writing about the mythology of baseball,
the soul and the magic.
Yeah.
That's how I know you're not all in on sabermetrics.
Well,
it's just
I really like it because I do. There is a part of my mind that is mathematically driven in that way. But what I don't like is when it tears away at the fabric of what I think makes the game matter to people. And what makes the game matter to people is some of those things that you say. Here's what I really do not like about sort of the sabermetric community at times, and that is that at various times through the years, that community can be really dismissive of some of those intangibles. They could really kind of make fun of the idea of grit and make fun of the idea of heart and make fun of the idea of leadership and some of these other things. And, because you can't easily find them in the numbers. And I really, really don't like that for multiple reasons. But one of the biggest reasons I don't like it is for so many people, that's why they watch the game. They don't want to see numbers just moving around on the field. They want, yes, that guy is a gritty guy. That's why I like him. That guy comes through in the clutch. That's why I like him. I don't need numbers to just completely shatter everything that I love about this game. And I do think there are times that the sabermetric community in general, that I consider myself a part of, I think we let fans down that way by trying to just be these kind of party poopers about the game. I mean, it's still supposed to be fun.
Yeah, it's kind of a microcosm for late capitalism too, just because, I mean, it's like the rich owners are just piling on. And now we can include the players too, who I'm a labor guy, so, I'm all for the players making money.
Sure.
But what did baseball lose? I mean, think of the Brooklyn Dodgers as the perfect example of them bums, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So beloved to the community. Frank Robinson, the guy wins the Triple Crown in 1967. Then he works at the shipyards in the offseason or something. Stan Musial's working at it. So these guys were there. They were theirs, for years. The Yankee, Casey Stengel just wrote down first names on his, we didn't have free agency. So he just wrote down, Yogi and Mickey and, he didn't even have to put last names on the scorecard. So we lost so much when we lost that. And then we got the pencils coming in, the pencil pushers coming in. No offense, Joe.
Yeah.
But telling us this is how it is. I'm looking at the game going, the league's batting .237. What happened to the sacrifice? What happened to the hit and run? Stolen bases are coming back a little bit, but they're kind of a gimme now. It's less, it's almost more of a statistical, let me push up my contract numbers here. I don't think anyone... I just feel like the game they're squeezing a lot of beauty out of it, the choreography. And
I think some of that is 100% true. I think that feeling is real. And I think anytime that somebody tries to deny that feeling, the place that I would say it is most daunting is with starting pitching. That when you talk specifically about baseball, people grew up all the way up until this generation with starting pitchers being as big a stars as anybody in the game, right? Like I grew up in the time of Seaver and Carlton and
Gibson,
Perry and then the period before that you had Gibson and Koufax, and the period before that you had Whitey Ford and Bob Feller and you just go back through the years and see and it really mattered. Starting pitchers mattered more than anybody else on the field. Like every game, they only started every 4 or 5 days, but when they were on the mound, they were the most important parts of the game.
Yeah, everybody was getting 270 to 320 innings.
Innings, absolutely. And when the playoffs came around, what you cared about was who's starting this game. That's all that mattered. And now it's not like that. And it's not like that because people realized through statistical, measurements and all that, it's better to throw 6 different pitchers out there throwing an inning or two.
Yeah, we just love it as fans. Nothing
I know, and it really does. As a fan experience, it's brutal. It's brutal. I mean, the Dodgers, we're in the middle of the playoffs right now, and the Dodgers just came back by throwing 13 pitchers in 2 games in order to, throw back-to-back shutouts. So they saved the series, but there were no heroes. It was just a whole bunch of, guys who could throw 100 miles an hour, and it's just different. It's just different.
Well, let me tell you about a moment that really just was like a slap in the face to me, a fan. It was a couple years back. Clayton Kershaw has thrown 79 pitches or something. He's got a perfect game going into the 9th inning, and they pull him. I understand it's early in the season. They're worried about his arm, but I mean, you think Bob Gibson's going to let that happen? Don Drysdale, you think the manager's going to even get the baseball out of that guy's hand?
I remember that day specifically. I got probably 10 different texts from people I know who I'm not super close. I mean, I got a million texts from people I know who I'm really good friends with, but I probably got 10 different texts from people who I'm moderate friends with or people that, I'm acquaintances with. Who are, they're baseball fans, but they're not huge baseball fans. They check in, and they were so angry. They were so, because they were not following the sort of the way that this game has gone. I mean, this is the Clayton Kershaw getting pulled didn't happen out of nowhere, right? It was years of building up to that, but they weren't following that. So all they know is one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, Clayton Kershaw, was throwing a perfect game, had only thrown, like you say, 80 pitches, and he gets pulled. And it's like, and I wrote it at the time, and I believe it now, because that happened 2, 3, 4 years ago now. I'm like, this damages the game long term. Like, because people will not forget this. They'll be like, oh, you know what? Baseball's not the same. Baseball's not the way it used to be. You wouldn't have pulled Koufax. You wouldn't have pulled Drysdale. You wouldn't have pulled Seaver. You wouldn't have pulled Greg Maddux or Randy Johnson or Pedro. I mean, guys more recent, you wouldn't have pulled any of those guys. So that does hurt. It hurts the game badly.
Well, and maybe because just the fact that Clayton Kershaw was willing to be pulled, maybe he should be pulled. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Bob Gibson's not getting off that mound without there's going to be fisticuffs out there with the manager. So, I mean, I wonder, maybe, not to diminish the greatness of Clayton Kershaw, but does the modern player lack that sort of grit because he doesn't have to work in a shoe store, or is he viewing the world as the billionaire views it, and everything becomes about protecting this golden asset? I mean, you could make the argument that Sandy Koufax made that decision retiring at 29.
Sure, at age 30, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Here's what I was saying. This is, I think the world of Clayton Kershaw, so I would say this anyway, but I would say in his defense, he had been dealing with a bunch of arm injuries. I mean, he is a guy that really, he was at a certain, he was past his prime already by then. So there is an argument to be made that he needs to protect himself in order to pitch. He was right at the beginning. It was the first game, his first outing of the season, that he had to protect himself. He wanted to pitch that season. As it turned out, he didn't. He got hurt anyway. But he wanted to be able to protect himself. So, I mean, everyone is specific. I don't think in Kershaw's
I might risk a brain injury for a Nobel Prize in literature. I mean, if I had to weigh that, I'm like, okay, Nobel Prize in literature.
That actually did happen. Johan Santana did insist on staying in a game. And it basically ended his career. So you could do that. The young Kershaw would never have allowed himself to get pulled. You don't have to go all the way back to Gibson or whatever. The young Clayton Kershaw would have absolutely stayed in the game. This Clayton Kershaw was a different version of himself. I cut him some slack, but there are other players that this has happened to that I have thought to myself, how are you not fighting to stay in the game? If you throw a perfect game, that's remembered forever. Like that's
only been 12 or 13 or something like
that.
Maybe a few more.
I mean, there's only been a few. There was one this year, which was the first time in more than a decade that one had happened.
Since Felix, maybe.
Since Felix, that's right. He was the last one. So it's. But I think about that a lot. I remember the game that did it for me was a few years ago when Matt Carpenter was playing in a game and the Cardinals were winning big. And he hit 3 home runs and 2 doubles by the 6th inning of the game. And they pulled him. They pulled him to rest him. I'm like, how many guys have hit 4 home runs in a game? Almost none. I mean, it's the same number as the guys who have thrown perfect games. I mean, and I get this feeling that is the hardest thing that baseball has to deal with in my mind, which is people forgetting that baseball is a game of moments. It's a game of memories. My whole book, my whole Why We Love Baseball is moments of the game. And when those moment opportunities come along, you have to take advantage of them. And maybe that is a larger cultural thing where we've started being much more focused on winning, much more focused on safety and risk averse and all of this and all of that. But then the days just go by and these incredible moments don't happen, and how much poorer we're all for that.
Yeah, and I've got on my notes here. I want to talk to you about some of these great moments, and also I want to dive into your top 100 lists. But I do have to ask you this out of personal curiosity, because we are of the same vintage. We have the same background. And I opened the show before you were with us here about talking about that sort of delicate statistical, balance of baseball, that equilibrium that aside from the live ball era and then the lowering of the mound, Then another big bugaboo is steroids. I got to know how you feel about steroids, because I noticed Barry Bonds is up there in your top 5 forever. Like,
Sure.
how do you
I would say it this way. It's awful that baseball went through that period, and there are a lot of people to blame. There are players to blame. There's management to blame. There's the game itself to blame. It hurt the game in ways that the game will never fully recover what it was. But when you go through that period of time,
and we will just never know. We just don't know who did, I mean,
and that's the thing. It's this.
We know Brady Anderson, because the guy had, he had his career high was like 19 home runs, and then
yet Brady Anderson never tested positive, and never, and at no point showed any like symbols other than him having this one incredible year. Brady Anderson is a great example to me of what steroids did to baseball.
Blurred that line between goodness and greatness, right?
If Brady Anderson hit 50 home runs out of nowhere in 1953, everybody celebrates him, right? Everybody believes in the players. But because Brady Anderson hit 50 home runs at the time that he did, nobody believes it. Even though there's no proof, there's never even really been any even circumstantial evidence that he used anything. Nobody suggests that knows him that he ever used anything, and yet suspicion is raised because of that. So I hate what it did to the game. That said, it did happen to the game. And as you said, we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because it was a game-wide thing. Everybody who knew kept it quiet. Nobody said anything. Nobody benched anybody for using PEDs. Nobody ever, really told on anybody for using PEDs. It just was a part of the game. And that's a part of history, and I don't see how you can wipe out that history. I mean, Barry Bonds, whatever Barry Bonds did off the field, whatever steroids he took, whatever illegal methods he used, on the field, we've never seen anything like him. And that it happened. It's on all of our memories, and so for me, that's how I try to mix and match this, feeling of how bad it was for the game. It's a lot like when you look back. I mean, it's very, very different, obviously, but looking back at the pre-Jackie Robinson era of baseball, I mean, it's like we could celebrate those players. We could celebrate Ruth and Gehrig and Greenberg and all these other guys,
but they didn't play in an
integrated league. I mean, it's just a part of the game.
So there's, it's. Bonds apologists will tell me over and over he never testified. I'm just, look, dude, the guy's head side.
I don't do that.
He was a monster. One guy that seems to escape the whole thing, and because he's such a high character guy, and his father is such a high character guy, is Ken Griffey Jr.,
right? Who
I got to see play. Willie Mays was my first idol. I got to see him at the stick when he was, 40 years old a couple of times in 71, 72. And Ken Griffey Jr. was my next hero, who I got to see when the Mariners were terrible. But I knew the elevator ladies at the suites, and I'd buy a $5 ticket, and I could sit down in Boeing section. I'd go to 75 games a year. And that's one of the things about being a baseball fan, is that even if your team sucks, there's this thing about baseball where there's the individual achievement, but then there's the team. But you can get through a bad season if your favorite player's hitting 56 dingers and hitting in a... So, But again, it comes down to not knowing. I can't convince. I'll say, well, what about Junior? I think he deserves a little extra credit for. I would say, I mean, beyond a doubt, I don't think the hyperbole is, or the story is, that he and Bond had kind of a covert sort of meeting about this, and Bonds went one way and Griffey went the other, and then you just see the numbers did the exact thing. I mean,
sure. Look, Ken Griffey Jr. is one of the not only one of the greatest players of all time, but he's one of the most, beloved players of all time. I mean, who was more fun to watch play than Ken Griffey Jr., right? I mean, that incredibly gorgeous swing of his, and the joy he played with, and the cap backwards, and the big smile, and cutting in front of his dad on that fly ball and making the catch, just like every single
And his grudge with the Yankees, like you couldn't have paid him $1 billion to play for the Yankees because they screwed over his dad.
Yeah, it's just great, and obviously the comparison with him and Bonds was very, very real, and the fact that they're both sons of baseball stars, and obviously Ken Griffey Sr. and Bobby Bonds also had a very, very different career and different viewpoints. So they were a wonderful contrast forever. And then, of course, when Barry Bonds became this superhuman, some combination of whatever illegal stuff that he did, plus the fact that he just was superhuman as a baseball player anyway, right?
Yeah, so the bat speed was sort of unparalleled.
His eye. I mean, there's just his ability to lay off of bad pitches is it was Ted Williams like. I mean, it's incredible. So you put all of that together at that exact same time, as you well know, Ken Griffey Jr. breaks down. He's in Cincinnati. He's not in Seattle anymore.
Some of those nagging injuries might have been aided by the use of steroids, too. That's another, they help with injury recovery.
And they certainly can. Of course, there's also, I mean, look.
You carry too much muscle mass.
You can carry too much muscle mass. Exactly. I mean, it's unfortunately, and I wish it was, because I've thought about this so many times, nothing about the steroid era is simple. Nothing is it's so easy. So the only thing we know that's black and white is that it was wrong. Like, that's the only thing that we know. It was wrong in multiple ways, and it hurt the game in multiple ways. That part we know, but who used...
Do we know with any degree of certainty if they're not being used today?
Oh, I don't think we know that with any degree of certainty. But what we do know is, and this would have, by the way, helped solve a lot of problems back then, there's testing now. There's testing. And look, you can be testing. That's why we don't know. But there is testing. There is high-end efforts. There are very severe punishments if you were caught. So that's all a league could really do is try to keep up with the testing and make you pay. And that's, to me, the real travesty of what happened. Yes, individually, the players... we could talk about them forever, and they're paying a price. Barry Bonds is never going to the Hall of Fame. It's never going to happen. Roger Clemens is never going to the Hall of Fame. Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, these guys are never going. Even A-Rod, never going to the Hall of Fame. So they're going to pay a price, but what price is there for the game when there's no testing, there's no policing, there's no punishments if they ever did catch anybody, which they couldn't because there was no testing. I mean, the game was run like that. And you know what? The guy who was running the game at the time, Bud Selig, he's in the Hall of Fame. So that's where I have real problems with trying to figure out individual scapegoats for this. It was a real game-wide problem.
Okay, so I'm going to spin this to a more positive note here.
Yeah.
And let's talk about these great moments. There are some great moments in the history of baseball, since it really was America's sport. I mean, unequivocally up until at least through the 70s, that are inextricably linked with American history. I mean, Bobby Thompson's Shot Heard Around the World in 1951, which was, then canonized by Don DeLillo in the opening chapter of Underworld.
Incredible.
Which was amazing, with Pafko at the wall. Mazeroski's walk-off in 1960. What are some of these big moments for you that really are just part of the national consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned a couple of the biggest ones. I mean, Babe Ruth's called shot in the 1931 World Series against the Cubs obviously will live on forever. In fact, they just sold the uniform that he was wearing when he hit the called shot for the largest sum of money at $23 million or something. The largest sum of money ever paid for any kind of memorabilia, sports or otherwise, was just happened. The Carlton Fisk home run in Game 6 of the 1975 World Series, we're old enough to remember it, right?
Wheeling that ball fair, yeah.
The ball fair, it's just incredible. Kirk Gibson's home run in the 1988 World Series on one leg, the Jack Buck shouting,
I got one good swing in me.
Yeah, I got one good swing.
See, I mean, that's what happens. These little pieces of the story that attach themselves to him, we're aware that that's what, Kirk Gibson said to Lasorda. He's like, "How you feeling, kid?" And it's like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of it's hyperbole, but it's part of the American mythos. And
Absolutely.
I just don't know if we can create these moments quite in the same way anymore with the current model of just succeed business. It's all about the ledger and the statistics and the win. I just don't know if... I do know that we could never have another Brooklyn Dodgers, and I will forever...
Yeah, I think the moments still happen. I mean, that part is that's the game. So when you watch Shohei Ohtani do something extraordinary, it still feels extraordinary. It feels as historic and legendary as anything that's ever happened in the game. When Aaron Judge does that, you feel it. And so I think on the field, those moments can still be recaptured. But your point about the teams and their connections to their communities and the way the players are viewed, no, that's not coming back. And that is... I mean, it's everything comes with its good and bad. Obviously, the Brooklyn Dodgers, for all that said, they left Brooklyn in order to get, to go to LA and make a lot more money. And so
LA gave them the O'Malleys a deal. They couldn't, they gave them such a huge piece of real estate down there at Chavez Ravine, but I don't know, man. I guess I'm getting older, Joe, and I'm kind of like an old man yelling at the clouds sometimes. And I just this is before my era, and I still resent that. You know what I mean? This is the Dodgers left Brooklyn 13 years before I was born, and I'm still kind of spurned by it. And
the Giants leaving New York and to go to San Francisco and so it's like the top end part of the game hasn't changed in that sense. So, like, owners were always looking to cash in as much money as they could. They treated players horribly. Like you said, these guys had off-season jobs, and the reason they had off-season jobs is the owners didn't want to pay them. They just did not want to pay them. These owners were becoming, incredibly wealthy on the game, and they were not doing it for the players. And now, of course, the players and owners are ungodly wealthy. So when they get into a fight to talk about, labor, like we
stoppages,
said, suddenly it's like, well, they're both wrong. Just give something back to the fans a little bit.
Exactly. The fans are like the third part of this that gets left out because, I'm very ambiguous about it. I mean, I just think there's something so great about Stan Musial working at the shoe store, but why should he when some guy's making money? But you just said it. There's the third part of the equation, and that's the fans. That's who they're playing the game for, and that's why Joe DiMaggio, who I'm going to – this is a clever little who's 56 on your all-time players. We'll talk about that. But that's why DiMaggio said he always played his hardest because there might be one fan out there that never saw me play. And that's how I feel when I do like a speaking event and I've got a hangover or whatever. I just try to bring the A game. I always think of that quote. And Sinatra said something similar. And Sinatra, for, by many reports, could be a real asshole. But you know what I mean?
But
hey, look at the guy in the brown socks. But he also, helped break racism in Vegas and stuff. So I'm just... As much as I want to be a guy who's not an absolutist, I need to work on that. I think as I get older, it's getting hard for me. So when you put together your top 100, you did something clever, and you put DiMaggio at 56. But I obviously, because of the 56-game hitting string, for those who don't know, which has never been beaten and never will, where do you really see him? Because I'm thinking, is he 17 to 25? Like, if you're really... Because, he had the shorter career, but he had a long enough prime that people that watched him said he's the greatest I ever saw. I mean, where do you put him?
Yeah, no, look, I was very cognizant of the fact that I wanted to connect players with specific numbers. Like, I do that throughout the book. And to me, 56 is, that is Joe DiMaggio because of the hitting streak. That is sort of it's not only to me, the most enduring record in all of sports, because like you say, it'll never get broken. Nobody will ever even come close to it again. I mean, Pete Rose got 44, and we'll probably never see that again. I mean, this is just the way the game is played. You're never seeing that kind of hitting streak again.
I think Ichiro got into the early 30s, but so much of that was just being a left-handed batter with that jump out of the box. He was halfway out of the box.
But there's the greatest point. There is the greatest sort of hitter, singles hitter we've ever seen, right? I mean, he sets the hit record like at 262. I mean, it was just crazy. So, and even that guy couldn't get a hit every game. I mean, like, so 56 is not only great because of that, because of its numerical, incredible, significance, but it's also, it totally represents who DiMaggio was, that he showed up every day, exactly like you were saying, for that kid that was watching. He's obviously one of the 15 greatest players of all time. And when you get to a certain level in this, you cannot decide whether or not Stan Musial, Lou Gehrig, Ted Williams, or Joe DiMaggio is a better player, right? They're all so great and so legendary that it's kind of silly. And then, of course, as you know, in the book, I put in a bunch of Negro Leagues players as well who have seen their time. So how do you compare a Joe DiMaggio to Oscar Charleston?
Exactly, yeah.
Gibson, you can't. So that why was, for me, the numbers were there to sort of represent the game. They were there to tell the story of these players. That's why I wanted them. And actually putting them in an order was important for the structure of the book and for what I was trying to say, but it also was not important, as in, I think this person is 17, this person is 16. That means I think 16 is better than 17. That wasn't how I thought about it.
Yeah, well, my kind of the larger view, the macro view of it, these are the 100 greatest. I mean, that's a distinction in itself. And then you can play, I mean, we may hold Musial in a higher esteem that he played in New York. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
He was in St. Louis, which is arguably one of the greatest baseball towns, but not a huge market. Joe, I got to say, it's been such a pleasure. I like your style because you're a purist. You got the poetry in you. You love the game, but you also, you're a realist as well. And I could learn a lesson from you. I need to be a little more forgiving of the steroid era. I need to, I got to stop yelling at clouds here. But you've been listening to Joe Posnanski. How many books have you written now? It's got to be...
the football book just came out. It's my eighth book. So
eighth book. He is one of our great sports writers. He's a national treasure, and we thank him for being on A Fresh Face of Hell today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison is brought to you by Fresh Face TV and produced by Jason Botkin and yours truly. Check us out on Instagram. Find us on YouTube. Like and subscribe. If you love the podcast, by all means, run out and buy all of Jonathan Evison's award-winning novels, available wherever books are sold.